Hey everybody, it's Rick Beyer, and it's History Happy Hour, and Chris is here, but we're having some technical problems, and there you can see Chris Anderson's trying to work out his technical problems. So hopefully we'll be able to have him joining us, and we'll be able to hear him shortly. And he's not a very happy camper right now, I think it's fair to say. So welcome everybody, as Chris is working that stuff all out. Welcome to History Happy Hour, and thank you to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for helping to bring you this show. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And whether you're watching live, watching on replay, or listening on the HHH podcast, we're glad you're here. And Chris, you're unmuted. Can we hear you? Can we hear you? No. Can you hear us? Maybe not. Not sure what's going on. Anyway, today we're going to try to do History Happy Talk. Although it could just be Rick talking if we can't get Chris up here on the feed. And we've been chatting for the last 15 minutes, and we just had a sudden technical problem and have been unable to kind of get him back there. So while he's doing that, I just want to say that I support everybody, and we thank everybody who supports us on Patreon. And I'll just show that these are our Patreon top shelf patrons, and you can join this group by clicking on patreon.com/historyhappyhour. So Chris, we got anything? Can you hear me, Chris? I do not hear you. So I'm sure this is great fun for everybody as we are trying to solve this problem, but you might try plugging in. Oh, I hear you now. I hear you now.
Hello.
Can you hear me? I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. And so now, can you hear me? Well, this is the exciting behind-the-scenes happenings of History Happy Hour, and once Chris has got that changed in his computer so that he can hear me, can you hear me? We are probably going to be able to get this show going, and you're seeing it all as it really is happening. There you go. So I'll just note who some of the folks that are here. I'm trying to fill time while this is all going on. So Gail and Ken and Craig, Liz Mumford, you're muted again, Chris. Sarah Hendrick, Lizzie Borden, Ashley and Bill. We're having an unusual happening right now. And
okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I can hear you. So just go to settings, audio, and
hello.
Yes. Hi.
I can hear myself, Rick, but I can't hear you.
Okay. I think you might want to restart your computer and come back in again. I can't think of a better response than that. So, hey, well, Chris is doing that, everybody. I think you might want to, let's see, let me send him a note. Chris, you can't hear me? Okay. We can hear you. Okay. So I've suggested to Chris via chat that he restart his computer, and gotta go out and come back in. And I am going to, yes, he's doing that. And while he's doing that, this is about the most fun we've had. Let me just ask you guys, what are you all drinking while we're waiting for Chris Anderson? Because I have some Port Charlotte Scotch. It's an Islay Scotch, and my wife and I had it in Scotland on the trip that we made there, and I thought it was about the most amazing Scotch that we'd ever had. And so we just found a bottle yesterday at Binny's here in Chicago, and we have added that to our our collection, and so I brought some of that to have with me today. And what are you all drinking? If you can throw it in on the comments there. We we have some coffee for Bonnie and Susan. Coffee's good. You could put some of this in coffee, and that would also be good. And surely we have some people. Wow, it's so strong. It's hard to.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Chris, we can hear you. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
oh, fucking, you're great. Oh, everybody. Yes.
Well, just ignore when we do the replay of this show. We'll just start it right here. Okay, so you ready? Ready? Okay, this is like, go. Hey,
how are you?
hey, I'm good. Calling Chris Anderson in
I'm in Windsor.
Windsor. Okay, fantastic. I'm in Chicago. Welcome everybody to History Happy Hour. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for helping to bring you this show. A little late maybe, but coming. Check out their rich offering of military history tours where the sound doesn't go on and off at StephenAmbroseTours.com. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And thank you also as well. I know I already did it, but to say again, thank you to our Patreon supporters, especially our top shelf patrons. And today we're going to have History Happy Talk. And Chris, I've already gone through and
you guys hear all the questions?
I explained why, your answers will be a little suspect and such, but I think we should probably just get into this show and put the past in our behind, or what is that? Is that?
Yeah, whatever. Okay.
Yeah, something like that. So give me. Whoa! Hold it.
Speeding up. I'm trying to catch up.
Fudge.
Bars finally open.
The bar is open. And so, hey, we're in a History Happy Talk episode. A bunch of you guys have sent us in questions. We also welcome anybody who wants to type us in a question, although who knows if we're going to get to them. I do know that George Luz said he was going to be watching today, and he says he is here from a cold and windy Rhode Island. George,
I did want to mention too. I see you may have already mentioned this, but Xavier's back. So
Xavier! Oh my gosh!
About that. Yeah. So welcome back, Xavier.
Xavier,
great show to come back.
I guess things got really quiet in that part of Spain, and so someone's asked to see the label on the front of that scotch. Marilyn, if you can get that scotch bottle out here, I'd like to show people.
Are you drinking scotch now?
I am. I'm drinking Port Charlotte.
What is that?
It's a wonderful scotch. I was explaining to folks. It's a Islay. Is that the word?
Yeah.
It's a 10-year-old Islay scotch. It is just. Thank you so much. Thank you. There you go. All right. And somebody wanted to see it, and so there we go. There's the bottle. Okay.
You brought that back with you?
I brought it back from Benny's last night.
Oh, okay.
But we had it for the first time in
that place you went on vacation. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, Edinburgh, and at Scran and Scally's in Edinburgh. Great restaurant that we went to twice and would go to again if we had the opportunity. So why don't we start out, Chris? You want to start out? You want me to start? You want to throw out a question there?
You've got all the questions there, so I'm going to let you because.
Well, Pete Underwood was the first person to reach out to us, and he reached out to us to ask, and I don't know the exact words because he sent this to you, but to ask about the 6th Army Group and their impact on the war. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about who the 6th Army Group was and their impact, and then I'll pick up from that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think obviously they are sort of the forgotten Army group of the war, and basically you've got it's a pretty unique organization. You've got 7th U.S. Army, which of course had originally been with Patton, and then Devers is going to take it over, and then later Patch. Devers will command the group, and it's 7th Army and French 1st Army, so it's unique in that you have that sort of dual command. But they invade southern France, which is an invasion that is very overlooked because it's wrongly dubbed the Champagne Campaign and given other names, and everybody assumes
August 44.
August 44. We were there for the 80th anniversary this year. But basically, in a month, this force, which is much smaller than say First Army, guys on Bradley, 12th Army Group, that sort of thing. But they liberated about a third of France over the course of that summer. They fight
coming up from the Mediterranean,
right? Coming up from the Mediterranean up the Rhone Valley into the Vosges, and they are going to get into Germany first. They're going to reach the Rhine first, and that they're going to be called back. They expect to cross the Rhine before December, but Eisenhower calls them back. He has other plans for them, and they then defeat what is the final German offensive in the West, Operation Nordwind. So after the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler tries again a little bit further south, so he's going to stop that. So they play a very, very critical role. They siphon off an awful lot of German troops. They liberate, and this is going to be very important, Marseille, which is going to provide Eisenhower a port, a way to get supplies into the ETO. And they are certainly a much overlooked army group in the war. And I've become a real big fan of them through studying them to get ready for Operation Dragoon Tour. But I think the war in Europe obviously will take a very, very different course if they're not there and they're not drawing German resources off.
So what's the date that they invade? What's the date of that invasion?
Yes, 20, I think it is.
Right.
Like
so it is really that invasion, along with many other things that are happening, that that the Germans say, "Oh my God, we've got to get out of what becomes the Falaise pocket." We retreat across France. We got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. And so Hitler, that is a huge impact.
Right, and Hitler actually does say it's like the worst day of my life, or the Black Day, or something like that. So yeah, I know. I always feel bad for Adolf, but it does precipitate a lot of things, and it kind of highlights that there's an awful lot more going on in Europe than First Army and Third Army marching across Europe. So
a word about Jake Devers before he commands the Sixth Army. He's in London commanding what will become the invasion force under Eisenhower, and his planners come to him with an idea for a tactical deception unit, and he's the guy who approves that. He is the guy who approves the plans for the Ghost Army.
And this is other things like commanding the invasion.
Well, everybody's got certain things that they're proud of, that they remember, big and small, and that's his.
Maybe that's why Eisenhower and Devers never got along so well, because of this whole.
It's actually one of the areas that they agreed on, because I've looked at the cable traffic between Eisenhower and Marshall, and there's a point at which Eisenhower is trying to get Marshall to hurry up the rest of the Ghost Army and get him to England in time that they can have them ready to go as soon as they land in France. So it's something that they're on the same page about.
Well, I just would also add really quickly. I mean, it's a campaign and battles that most of us, or most people that study the war, know very little about, but they know bits about it. For example, Audie Murphy gets his Medal of Honor in the 3rd Infantry Division, which suffers more time in combat than any other division in the United States Army, is all part of this army group.
Right, and we had that guy on whose dad was in the 3rd Division, and he wrote kind of a novel, but it was better than we thought it would be. It was pretty good, and okay. Well, so should we just move on down the list?
You just keep moving on down the list.
We're just gonna move on down the list. So James Matsuoka, who was on your 2017 Band of Brothers tour, says, "Why didn't the U.S. Army surround and bypass the Hurtgen Forest instead of slogging through it?"
Okay. Do you want to take a crack at that first?
Yeah. Well, I would say a couple of things. I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but I would always say, first of all, when people come up with some great idea of what we should have done after they've been studying the problem for 80 years since then, I want to say these guys are going from 0 to 60 in 3 years. We're going from a tiny little army that hasn't even done full-scale maneuvers, just barely. I think in 1940 is the first year they're doing the big maneuvers in Louisiana, Tennessee. And so the command doesn't necessarily always know exactly what they should be doing. And they've just gone into the on the ground combat in Europe in June. They've been less than 6 months there. So there's an inexpertise there. That's not really a word, but I also think that a big part of this, and you can pick up on this a little bit, is Courtney Hodges, the First Army commander, who is exhausted, who is kind of he's been kind of a golden boy, and Bradley loves him because he used to be Bradley's commander. So Bradley's not going to second guess anything that Courtney Hodges does. Bradley calls him sir, even though he works for Bradley. He's exhausted. He's not visiting the front. He is harsh on his officers who work for him, and therefore he's not getting accurate information. And I think he's kind of a straight ahead, knock him down guy, and figures the way to deal with the Hurtgen virus is attack it and go through it. And that turns out not to be the deal.
And there's one other thing that you kind of forgot to mention.
Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Courtney Hodges is an idiot. He is somebody who is clearly promoted way beyond his bandwidth. He failed out of West Point in 1903.
Right. Comes up unlike being a private,
Right. Unlike Patton, who kind of weasels his way back into the academy or to stay in the academy, he leaves. He enlists as a private, and he gets his commission by 1906. Serves with some distinction in World War I, but as a very much a kind of a World War I combat charge the trenches sort of guy, and he just doesn't have sort of that that suppleness. He doesn't. He's a pretty miserable commander. Lots of people, Simpson, Devers, others have commented upon just how unpleasant First Army headquarters were. There was always a lot of infighting and jealousy and not a lot of grip. And there's another interesting thing, because I was thinking about getting ready for this question. There's a quote that Bradley writes about First Army and Hodges. And again, a bit of a paraphrase, but he says that that the First Army did not have the flair of Patton's Third or the breeziness of Simpson's Ninth. But en route, they ticketed more German prisoners than any other American army and buried more American dead in the wake of their advances than any other American army. And I think, without intending to, that says an awful lot, because they do defeat a lot of German soldiers, but they suffer pretty grievous casualties because Hodges just doesn't show that suppleness. And in the Bulge, he panics. In fact, I was getting ready for the Bulge trip coming up, and I was reading some accounts of him in his headquarters at Spa, and he's basically in his pajamas in bed while the whole world just dissolves, and he's not even a factor in the battle.
Kind of like the coach of the Bears in the recent debacle.
So I mean, I guess the long answer to the question is we didn't go through it because Hodges and Bradley showed a real lack of initiative or ingenuity. They didn't have to do it, and I will forever damn them for that, because they never even went to see where the battle was being fought. They just poured division after division into the woods where they were destroyed, and those divisions that are destroyed are the ones that get run over by the Germans at the start of the Battle of the Bulge. So,
all right. So next question on the list, I'll read it and then I'll try to take this one on and you can add to it. Chris and Rick, says Todd Barry, was Lincoln justified in being upset with Meade that he did not follow Lee and annihilate him at Williamsport before he crossed into Virginia? Well, so he's talking about 1863, July, after the Battle of Gettysburg. And Meade has been made commander of the Union Army about 5 days before or a week before. He has just gone through one of the most terrifying battles of the Civil War. He has seen Lee's, what must have seemed to him like Lee's entire army make an attack on the third day of the battle against his troops, which they are able to fight back. And then Lee's army starts to retreat out of Pennsylvania, and Meade is slow in following Lee there. And Lincoln is unhappy with him about it. And I think that, you have to understand that Lincoln's been dealing with George McClellan,
right,
who's got something in common with Courtney Hodges.
Yes.
He's kind of an idiot.
Well, Well, Hodges actually sends his men forward, whereas McClellan just
McClellan, whatever. Yeah, McClellan, but Lincoln is so frustrated with George McClellan, and now then he's gone through Hooker, and now he's got Meade, and he really wants Meade to strangle Lee, but Meade is just like trying to find his way in command. He's got an army where he's lost, I don't know, 20% of the people to casualties. Everybody's pretty shook up. So I think Lincoln is a little bit unfair. I mean, I understand his point of view. I understand why he wants Meade to kind of put a stranglehold on Lee, but Lincoln actually communicates some of his displeasure, and Meade then offers his resignation, because that's what everybody always did in the Civil War. Immediately, as soon as you criticize them, they offered their resignation. And then Lincoln writes him another letter detailing why he's upset with him. One of the things about that second letter is that Lincoln never sent it. It's one of those letters that Lincoln writes and then he sticks in a drawer because he thinks better of it. And I think he probably realized that, yeah, Meade had to deal with things that he didn't understand. He had to deal with the situation on the ground. And while he wasn't thrilled with the way he handled it, he wasn't angry enough to kind of create a big blow up.
well.
So I think, yeah, go ahead.
I would add to that I think that we tend to forget this, but the Union Army, I mean, they win at Gettysburg, but they're bludgeoned pretty badly. I mean, in 3 days, they enter combat with 110,000. They suffer somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 casualties.
Yeah, well, I think it's like 25% casualties.
Yeah. I mean that it's also on top of which they weren't in great shape when they got up to Gettysburg to fight the battle. So I don't even know, with as much goodwill in the world, whether they could have pursued Lee with any kind of decisiveness. They were
in pretty tough shape.
Tough shape. I just don't. And I think what you said about Lincoln was true. And I think also, of course, he's coming off Vicksburg, which is a much more resounding victory. And he
really wants that. He wants both of those, right? He wants East and West, boom, and he's frustrated by it. So I get that, but I think he's not quite. He's not on the spot. He's not on the scene. He can't see.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think
what Meade sees.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going down the list. I mean, we said we could do this in any order, but we're just going down our list.
Yeah, and I think we'll save the last.
Yeah, you can bring in some. We'll come to the questions that are on the screen in the last 15, 20, or did you?
Yeah. I was just going to say we'll save like 10 or 15 minutes to talk about tours, because we're getting a lot of questions about tours. And
okay.
But,
so, question is: have you done a program on Virginia Hall? She certainly was an extraordinary person. And that's from Richard Doherty.
Yeah.
And Virginia Hall was a spy, right? She was an American who served in the SOE.
Mm-hmm.
And we did an episode 65, which we talked about her, but we talked about other things as well. The book was Mission France, The True History of Women of the SOE by Kate Vigers. But I don't think we've done a whole show on and there is a book about her, right?
Yeah, it's called A Woman of No Importance. It's a magnificent book. I think it's Sophie Purnell wrote it. And Virginia Hall, I mean, she is not. It trivializes it to a degree to say she was a very courageous woman. She was just a courageous person. She was incredible. She's a Baltimore socialite, very well educated from the right side of the tracks, as they say. And wanted a career in the Foreign Service. She couldn't get one because of being a woman. So she eventually gets some jobs in a diplomatic capacity. She's in Lyon. The war comes, and she sort of creates her own role and becomes pretty critical to operations there. And there's one of the things that you should add about it. You probably know this already, but she had lost a leg in a
right. I was going to say.
accident. She basically shot her leg off. So she had a fake leg, and she is operating out of Lyon. And on the Dragoon tour that we were talking about earlier, actually, we got to go to where her apartment was, which was pretty neat. But she's told basically, you got to get out of here now, because she functions from 1940 till December of 1941, because of course America isn't at war with Germany. They have ambassadors in Vichy, so she can kind of work under that. But once America comes into the war, she's got to get out, and she goes over Pyrenees, as I recall. But she's radioing back to London and saying, I'm being held back by I think she called him Rupert. She named her leg, and her handlers in London said, "Well, if Rupert like misbehaves, just shoot him." And she said, "I can't really do that." Yeah, she makes it out. She wants to get redeployed again. She's an absolutely incredible woman.
Yeah, well, we'll see if we can't come back and do an episode on her. I'm not sure what the situation is with that book and author, but we can look into that and possibly doing that. So we get from Rona Simmons, who is
Thanks,
herself.
Don. It wasn't Rupert. Yvonne was correcting me. It's Cuthbert, not Rupert, for the leg.
Cuthbert. Oh my God, Chris, you've been called out on a fact. Probably the first time ever.
Last.
So Rona Simmons, who is herself an author and a viewer, says, so given that this is billed as a fun show, okay, so we hope, what do you know about what our soldiers and sailors imbibed and how much during World War II? What were their favorites, a beer or a Manhattan? I heard there is a book, Wine and War, which I have also heard about and want to read, but I've not yet had a chance to read it, but what a great concept. So we were talking about this before the show, and there's probably an entire volume of books that could be written about this topic. And in terms of what soldiers and airmen and others are drinking, I think it's whatever they can get their hands on at the time, and whatever volume they're permitted to before they pass out. And I think that's a general rule.
Yeah. And I think it's important to know that, U.S. forces, you're not allowed to have liquor. I mean, the officers would be given, as part of their ration, would get a fifth, and there was medicinal alcohol, and it becomes important during the Battle of the Bulge when the medics figure out you can put a little alcohol in your canteens and your water won't freeze. But officially, there is no alcohol for enlisted people in the U.S. Army. So
beer,
yeah. So, but they would be issued. So, again, after some of the battles in the Pacific, the Marines get issued like 2 cans of warm beer. So I think, a GI would, or a sailor or an airman would like whatever he could get his hands on. So there was no favorite.
And I know this will come up again in the show, but I've been reading Donald Miller's book, Masters of the Air. And I mean, certainly the bar is open for these guys. They're not Wine and War. Yeah. I want to hang on. Show it up again. I
was bouncing around in the chair. Yes.
I was on the cruise ship, and there was one of the guys in the cruise ship, one of the staff in the coffee shop was reading that. And I said, why are you reading that? And he said, because I'm studying to be a sommelier and I want to know something more about the wine than just what it tastes like. And I was like, yo, love it.
Well, you're working on a tour about that book.
And I always remember we've stopped toasting every time I say Ghost Army, but let's pick that up again. Okay.
Start toasting Operation Cobra.
The Battle of Cognac Hill is they're headed towards Paris in August of 1944, and they come across a huge trove of, and the Germans seem to have these. From the accounts we have of soldiers, the Germans seem to have spent most of their time in France creating troves of alcohol that they then left behind or left some of them behind. And these guys get into this, and they have basically a 4-day drunk. And I was talking, we were out there in France with one of the soldiers, Gezo Nemeth, and he was talking about how they had to move on, and they buried some of the booze in a potato field, but they were so drunk when they buried it that they couldn't go back and find it. They couldn't figure out which one it was. So there certainly is a lot of boozing going on.
Well,
go ahead.
As I always do a plug for the Brits and Commonwealth, but of course, they are issued liquor. There's a rum ration that's given out. Churchill thought beer was very, very important to British soldiers, so he made sure that beer was issued. But there's some great accounts of whenever, like I know in the case of the 101st and Easy Company, when they were under British command, and when 9th Army, because they butted up against the Brits, when they came under British operational command, they all just bitched and moaned and groaned and hated the British rations, except for the rum ration. They were all quite happy about that. And there were some teetotalers back in the States that were saying, well, our boys don't drink. And they were quickly corrected.
Well, and then after a while, when the air crews were coming in for their post-mission briefings, and they're going through 5 and 10% casualties on each mission, every plane that goes down is 10 guys who disappear from your life, and they're not in your barracks anymore. They're just gone. We don't know if they're dead, captured, whatever. They started giving them a double scotch before the debriefing, and that was very popular among the air crews.
Yeah.
All right. So, and Rona sent I'm not going to read the story, but she did send us a story of a drinking story that appeared in one of her books. And just to give her a plug, it's The Other Veterans of World War II. So that's one of her books. Okay. If you were going to buy 3 history books, Andy Aarons asks, 3 history books for a 15-year-old godson, what would they be? You want to give a title? Suggest.
Well, there's that classic D-Day, a D-Day guide for millennials.
Oh yeah, and I know somebody who wrote a chapter in that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Who would that be?
You.
Yes, that's priceless. No, but that actually is good. It's I think so. It's geared towards that age group. But moving on from that.
Well, I'm kind of that's a newer book, an older suggestion, and it's a novel, but it's what got me interested in history of World War II was the book, The Winds of War, and the follow-up volume, War in Remembrance by Herman Wouk. And it's kind of a Forrest Gump of World War II, because Captain Pug Henry, who is the lead character in these books, he kind of ends up being everywhere in Europe and the Pacific through a series of strange circumstances. And it spends time with Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin. But the history in that book is absolutely the most amazing history of all these battles. And especially for me, especially the Battle of Midway. And the 5 minutes at Midway where the American planes discover the Japanese fleet after all the torpedo planes have been shot down, and the dive bombers find the Japanese fleet. And that is an amazing moment. And I would think that there'd be a lot in there to appeal to if a 15-year-old is a reader and they start into it, they're going to find these characters amazing and like them a lot.
Yeah. And I would add, I think Ambrose's books are a really good place to start as well. I mean, obviously, Band of Brothers would be a pick. D-Day would be important. Citizen Soldiers, because Ambrose was such a good writer, and they're driven by the stories and recollections of the guys. So you'll get some really great first-person accounts, and I think that they're very accessible to people of all ages. So I would recommend Ambrose's books as well.
Citizen Soldiers is a book that basically starts the day after D-Day, and it kind of fills in what we spend so much time focused on D-Day. I was talking about this the other day at a World War II conference. We forget the whole rest of the war, but there's a whole war that starts the day after D-Day and continues on. And Marilyn handed me a note. So we've got her suggestion. Pardon?
A hand-delivered question.
Hand-delivered note? No, it's an answer. It's the book Company H, Aytch, Aytch, and this is an account of a Civil War veteran of his experiences in Company H, and obviously is a very strong choice as well.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So now we got a big one from Neil Shara. You ready? You ready
for this
a big one? All right. How would the Second World War have changed in Europe if Germany did not invade the Soviet Union? So I'm going to say that again so people can get their minds around it. How would the Second World War have changed in Europe if Germany did not invade the Soviet Union? Would the U.S. have dropped an atom bomb on Germany? Would Western Europe be speaking German now? Would the UK have been able to maintain its independence if a peace agreement was negotiated?
Well, no, they're just like the simple questions you're throwing at us. It's just
but how would it be different? And I think for me, the first question is, where do we step off the reality timeline? Right? Hitler has said in his magnus opus, right, Mein Kampf, he wants to invade the Soviet Union for living space. So what dissuades him? Is it the plucky response of Great Britain? Is it all the German bombers that have been shot down? So when does he decide not to invade the Soviet Union? That to me is the first question in trying to figure out what would have happened next.
Well, I mean, I think maybe when any of this inner circle slaps him across the face and says, "What are you out of your mind?" Well, I mean, I get this question a lot on trips, and I would say that first of all, Hitler can't not invade Russia, right? That's just so much a part of his DNA, and it's part of the package of goods that he sells the German people, right? So if he's going to deliver on what he said to them, he has to invade. But I guess if there's a couple of moments where he could have maybe come to his senses, when he sees or when the Japanese ambassadors tell him about what the Red Army just did to the Japanese army in Manchuria, that could have maybe given him some moments of pause and reflection. Also, after Russia goes into Poland, and it's not the Red Army at its finest, but German officers there are certainly getting a sense of what the Red Army can do. Maybe that could be a point where he says, well, I'll just wait a little bit longer.
So what if he waits? I mean, so to me, Hitler is not a guy who's going to sit around and go, okay, well, I'm not invading Russia. Things are going on, or Soviet Union. Things are at a sort of a stasis point with Great Britain. They're bombing us a little bit, but it's not hurting too much. So I'm just going to kind of go off into peacetime activities. That doesn't seem like kind of a Hitler approach.
No, that's what I mean. And
so he's going to then step things up against the UK, and that's going to become a real problem for them.
Yeah, but the problem there is that I think that what Hitler is selling and what he wants economic self-sufficiency, and he wants Lebensraum for the German people, neither of which he's going to get from Great Britain, even if he defeats them. So he needs a place to go where he can get land and resources. Now, he may have expanded his holdings in Eastern Europe some more, which would have, prolonged the war, certainly. And Britain would have stayed in the fight to prevent that. But it's important to remember that Hitler doesn't really want to fight Great Britain. He doesn't want to destroy Great Britain. He only does that when he feels he has to, and when they won't come to terms with him. So
you think he just waits? He waits. If he doesn't invade the Soviet Union in July of 1941, he just waits for them to do something?
I think if he doesn't invade the Soviet Union, his leaders are saying it's going to be, I think, 44 before the army is really ready. So maybe he just sits tight and he tries to build a bigger, more powerful force. Hopefully in that time, if you're him, he has some more in-depth conversations with the Japanese about what they can possibly do. And then, as part of a joint effort to have control in North Africa and Asia, then maybe that the war with England is a little bit more seriously fought.
So you're not thinking that Western Europe would be speaking German now?
I don't see that scenario.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario after Hitler has taken France and is building up that the other countries aren't going to say, hey, we're on to this. We're going to take this guy on.
Right. Yeah, no,
and Stalin would have attacked him eventually.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the problem with the question that Neil posed, is just so hard to imagine the war without the war in Russia being a part of it. Right.
Okay. So we have like 6 minutes to see what other questions on the list we can get through. And then we're going to go to you're going to have to start looking at the questions that are here in the timeline and see what ones we want to take there. Mm-hmm. So Wally Morrison says, I've always been interested in the Army Medical Corps. When were the first hospitals established in France after D-Day? Other questions, were MDs and nurses drafted, or did the Army rely on enlisted personnel? How were the medics in the field trained, and to what standards? Well, I'd say a couple of things about that. The 13th Field Hospital went into operation near Omaha Beach on June 10th. So that's 4 days after the invasion. We've got doctors doing surgery and operations on wounded in France. And that's obviously going to just continue and build up over the course of the war. Doctors certainly were I mean, the Army made an effort then, as they have made an effort. I mean, they had a doctor draft for many decades, bringing in doctors in to the Army. If you were a young doctor graduating medical school, you would be in the Army. I mean, or you would be in the Air Force. That was pretty much going to be automatic. Nurses were commissioned, doctors were commissioned, and nurses were commissioned out of nursing school. Medics, so about between 1/10 and 1/20th of soldiers, like 1 out of every 10 or 1 out of every 20 soldiers was a medic. They were trained to stop bleeding, apply dressings, sprinkle on sulfa powder, and administer morphine, and not a whole lot beyond that. And it was a 2-month program, and then like a month of kind of essentially being an intern, right? Being training in the field. So they're medics, and they're heroic, and they're depended on, but they don't know a whole lot more about it than the GIs do.
Right. Well, but I will say what I find interesting is, given that kind of very just small window opening of training, of all of the veterans I spoke to, and there have been a lot, and of all the books I've read about veterans that I've read, and there have been a lot, I can't even think offhand of one that says, boy, our medic was really shit.
Yeah.
I mean, you could read about, 90-day wonders, generals not doing their, the whole list. Let's go. I cannot think of a moment where a combat soldier said, yeah, our medic was just shit. So I don't know whether that was a byproduct of their training or learning on the job or what, but for the bare bones that they got, they were pretty good. I have looked this up, and I think the mortality rate in World War II, if you're wounded, your survival rate is still much better than it had ever been before.
It's really high. It's like 75% or something.
Yeah. So,
I mean, whereas it in the Civil War, it was like 25%.
Yeah.
It's gone up and up. And because they've got a whole system for treating you in the field, stabilizing you, getting you to a field hospital, getting you on a plane. I mean, again, Ghost Army, okay. But the first Ghost Army unit that comes into France flies in on C-47s to the the landing field right behind Omaha Beach on June 14th. And Victor Dowd was one of the soldiers in that unit. And he said that, they're on this plane. And he said, and Victor's telling the story, he's going, and there are ladies on this plane. And I said, what are you doing here? Victor did have a way with the ladies. And they said, well, we're going in to when you get off the plane, we're going to be bringing on the wounded soldiers. That are too badly wounded to be treated in Normandy. And he said they were lined up on the, on the carts, and then immediately, as soon as they got off the plane, they brought them onto the plane and flew them back to England. So there's a whole system going on that there just really wasn't there before.
Yeah, and I'm trying to keep talking because there was as we were talking, there's a book that I remember reading, and if I can find it real quick, I'll. And if not, we can post something later. But it was about the U.S. medics in World War II.
Sure. I would just I'll start to introduce the next question, and I'll get a chance to say it, and then we can stop and answer this one before that. But this is from Sharon Peterson. She says, given the number of casualties the 8th Air Force was experiencing during daylight bombing, when did the P-51 Mustang enter service in Europe, and could that have been expedited? Or could drop tanks have been developed for the P-47s or other escort fighter planes, so they would have had a longer range? And while Chris is looking this up, I'll just say, so the P-51 development really starts, I think the first P-51 flies in like 1940 or 41, but what really makes the P-51, the RAF is flying it, and they say, well, this is nice, but it doesn't have much of an engine. What if we marry this airframe with a Rolls-Royce engine, and then you could give it drop tanks as well? So suddenly you have speed, you have distance, and probably by 1942, sometime they've figured this out. But what's holding it up is that the so-called bomber mafia, the head of the 8th Air Force, what's his name? The head of the 8th Air Force,
Arnold.
Hap Arnold,
Oh, you mean
Tui Spatz,
Spatz.
all these guys. They believe that the bombers always get through, that all those machine guns on the B-17, you know, the turret below, the turret above, machine guns in front, machine guns in the back, machine guns at the side, they're going to fly in a tight formation. They don't need fighters. They are going to get through. And so they actively resist. The top people in the U.S. Army Air Corps resist the idea of really developing fighter escorts that are going to take them all the way to Germany until they suffer massive losses in late 42, early 43. And at that point, they're like saying, okay, now we're on it. We got to get these fighters in. But it's not till late 43 that the P-51s with the Rolls-Royce engine and the drop tanks start to join up. So I've covered some time here. You want to go back and tell us about that?
Yeah, no, I'm going to have to find that. We'll post something because
Okay.
there's a whole long list of books on medics, but it's not the one I'm thinking of. But I will look that up.
But a great book, which I have read and actually am now reading a second time, Masters of the Air by Donald Miller. It is the basis for the Apple miniseries, although the Apple miniseries is just about the 100th bomb group. This is really about the whole air war fought in Europe, not so much the Italian air war. Ambrose has a book about the Italian air war and George McGovern and the other pilots who were involved in the Italian air war. But I thought it was a really good book that presents a lot of information that I didn't know about. So. Okay, so she had another question, and you said you wanted to answer that, and that'll be the last question we're going to do from the list. I think maybe we'll get one more in.
Right. Well, I mean, I remember she asked about
Napoleon famously said, if you were going to attack Italy, you approach it from the top of the boot rather than the bottom. Why did the Allies insist on attacking from the bottom and from Anzio, where things got bogged down with horrible casualties?
Well, back to the first part of your question. In the bombing war, we didn't have the range to land in northern Italy, right? We because
we're coming from the south,
right? And if you want to have
Africa.
if you want ships and you want ships protected by air power, you have to have the range, and you're going to go in through the south. And also, one of the other things you have to factor in, and this factors into our very first question, Operation Dragoon, is the Americans don't really want to be there, because what we want to do, or what George Marshall wants to do, is land in France and march across France and into Germany. And anything that diverts from that is not something he wants to get involved with. And he's always worried that the British are going to suck us into this never-ending campaign in Italy and the Balkans. So if even theoretically we had the range to land in northern Italy, I think Marshall probably would have tried to put the kibosh on it, because then, Churchill and the British are going to be, marching all over the Balkans and Yugoslavia and diverting us from what he really wants to do and what he sees as the way to victory. So I think it's a strategic vision question, and it's a technology question.
Okay, so have you looked now at the questions that are here in the actual comments area? We cannot ignore all these questions. We didn't get through all the questions that came to us previously, but Chris, you now can be the ruler of what questions we're going to address from our viewers.
I'm looking at it. Well, Liz Mumford wanted to know, and I remember she asked, in all of our years of doing this, what was the spot that still, I guess, we're left in awe of? And so I'm going to ask you, Rick, to start.
The church in Angeville in Normandy is the spot that I'm in awe of. It's where two medics from the 101st Airborne treated about 80 people on the night of afternoon of June 6th through the morning of June 8th. They somehow managed to create a safe space in the middle of a battle that was back and forth between Germans and Americans. They had German soldiers who came into this church, and they just stared them down, and the German soldiers turned around and left. They treated both Germans and Americans. It's a miraculous story, and for me, it's my favorite spot in Normandy. And whenever I bring groups there, I think it becomes their favorite spot in Normandy, because it's such a emotional kind of story. And there's one moment where the two medics, was it Wright and
Kenneth Moore and Wright.
Right and Moore. and they've gone out to get this guy who's wounded, and they're trying to bring him back, and they have to cross this field. And the Germans are on one side firing, and the Americans are on the other side firing. And one of them says to the other, says, "Well, make sure they can see your armband, and we'll just go across." And they just head across the open area for the church, and both sides stop firing. And they take this wounded person to the church. They get him inside, and both sides start firing. And I think in 36 to 48 hours, they lost a couple of people in that church. Really, not many at all. And they saved almost all those lives, and they were both decorated for that.
Yep. Well, I think that's a really hard question, Liz, actually. But the two spots that stick with me the most, first and primarily, to stand on Omaha Beach and look up at the bluffs. I over 100 times I've been there, and every time I do, I stand and I look up at the bluffs, and I just can't believe what they did and what they accomplished, and it's just amazing to think. It's still hard to comprehend. So that would be number one. And then number two for me would be the airfield on Peleliu. And again, it's to stand on that ground and to see basically a pool table, flat, wide open field that all these young Marines charged across. It's just awe-inspiring. You can't fathom it. You can't imagine how they did it. I feel very kind of small in comparison to them when I go to those places. So those would be the two for me.
You know, one of the things about Omaha Beach, when I'm there with a group, I'm always studying the tide chart to figure out how I can be there an hour after low tide, which is when the invasion took place. And then when we get there an hour after low tide, I walk everybody down those stairs, and if nobody falls and breaks their ankle, I say, let's walk out to the waterline. And we walk out to the waterline, and we turn around, and I say, okay, now take all the bags that you put on the airplane that you brought with you to France. You're carrying all of those and some more things besides. And you're going to run from here the quarter of a mile to the shore with people shooting at you. Go. And by the way, you're not getting off here. You're probably getting off another 100 yards out where the water's up about your waist. And to me, that is indeed a very dramatic perspective to have. And I think a lot of people, again, it kind of just changes their whole view of that moment.
Yep, absolutely.
What else you got for me, man?
All right. Well, I think we should now. We've got have much time left. We should probably touch on our tours a little bit. Yeah. So we got a lot of questions. So Rick, I don't know if you want to start with some of the things that we have planned for early next year, and you can highlight a few of your trips, and I'll talk about.
Yeah, why don't I do that? And we're sorry, everybody who gave us questions in advance or gave us questions during the show that we haven't been able to get to.
Well, I'm gonna have a wrap up comment about that. So,
okay. But so in April, Chris and I are doing a tour that's sold out at this point, but it's a Battle of Lexington 250th anniversary tour, where we're going to be in Boston for and the Lexington and Concord area for about a week before the battle, and then we're going to attend the reenactment of the battle. And I look forward to completely changing Chris's mind about the culpability of the British forces.
Not going to happen
during the war and the Revolutionary War, as it's called. And so anyway, that's one trip we're doing. Then I'm doing a D-Day to the Rhine trip that's in June, and then I guess I can say you and I and George Luz are all supposed to be on a cruise together in June aboard the Crystal Serenity. So maybe we'll post more information about that for people who are interested. And then I'm doing Ghost Army Tour. We do those every other year, and I think we have 10 people signed up, so we need a few more. But it starts in England, goes to Germany. And then doing the Revolutionary War Boston to Quebec tour. And then what we're hoping is that in 2026, we're going to finally get around to the Revolutionary War tour we haven't done yet, which would be campaigns of George Washington going from New York to Philadelphia and dealing with all the stuff that happens between 1776 and 1781 in that New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia area.
You handle that one, and then maybe we'll do another Revolutionary War tour that I'd be happy to help with, which would be like, the Revolutionary War in the Caribbean, I think.
Oh yeah.
Or-
No, I'm totally up for that
That
one.
would be the guy to lead the Gibraltar portion.
And then, but also in 27, I'm interested in doing 250th anniversary of the Battle of Saratoga, and I'm hoping to lure you into that one. So
Anyway,
let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to do like the Battle of New York because the wrong side wins.
Well,
Although that is part of the George Washington. Okay, how about
All right.
you? What have you got going?
we got a lot going on. I mean, other than the usual slate of things, I know some people have asked about some new trips coming up. So we're going to be doing in May. Obviously, we'll be doing our VE Day trip. So we're going to basically follow the last about 100 days of the war in Europe. We're going to follow the Americans up to from Remagen up to the Elbe. Then we're going to link up with the Russians, and we're going to kind of circle around Berlin and then follow the Red Army into Berlin. And we'll have 4 or 5 days in Berlin. We'll be there for the ceremonies. We're going to see a lot of new kind of interesting stuff in Germany. I don't usually get to do Colditz with a great
Colditz Castle.
Wewelsburg, which was Himmler's little private castle. We're going to go to the site where the Americans and the Russians link up. We're going to go to Dresden to see the German Army Museum, which I'm really excited about. So we got a whole bunch of stuff going on with that. So that'll be May. We're looking at finally getting to do our SOE tour. So that was exciting. A lot of people asked me about that. And we're going to be doing Normandy 100 Days of Battle. So that's going to be kind of taking off what we did when we did our master class. It's going to be
great.
Everything that happened in Normandy after June 6th. So, kind of the battles of the breakout, Operation Cobra. There you go. There'll be some Canadians involved.
Land de la Mort, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. And then
Falaise Gap.
Falaise Gap. Oh, yeah, obviously.
Harder of Death.
Verrières Ridge. So there'll be a lot packed into that.
Nice.
Then doing a repeat of Scotland in August, the usual Band of Brothers thing. And then in November, I'm going to be doing a site inspection with a good friend of mine at Maynooth University in Ireland. And we're going to do the site inspection for a Military History of Ireland tour, which we are hoping to do.
That's what the guy we've had on the show.
So,
right?
Yeah.
That's what the guy we've had on the show. What's his name?
A couple times. He can see the hat on the horizon.
Okay. I'm trying to get you to say his name, but I can't. What's his
David
name?
Murphy.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
David Murphy.
I can't remember names. But so we've got a lot of a good story. And did you have a closing comment? You said you wanted to make a closing comment about other.
Well, yeah,
questions that people had.
I really enjoy these history happy talks, and I'm always overwhelmed because whenever we put out the word for it, we'll get like one question, and Rick and I will start saying, "Oh my God, is anyone going to ask us any questions?" And then right before the show, we get lots of questions, and then we feel bad because we can't answer them. So, do you like these shows? And if you do, maybe it's something that we could do, like once a quarter or something. But we have some parameters, like questions about Normandy or questions about whatever, But so
tell us your thoughts on
the
how
questions are a little bit more focused, and we can
that.
hopefully.
Yeah, and why don't we talk to Cheryl and see if we can't book like one a quarter at least, and then sort of see how that goes. And
because I really like the chance to let you guys ask us questions, and I really like to answer the questions. And I feel bad that we can't get to more of them. So maybe this is a way to facilitate it.
I'm sorry that you feel bad, but that's the way it goes.
I'll have more.
So next week, we're going to be talking about the only non-president who's really made the White House his home, from his first visit in 1941 to his last visit 18 years later. We'll explore that story with Robert Schmuhl, who's the author of Mr. Churchill in the White House, the untold story of a prime minister and two presidents. And I certainly want to get to the bottom of the story of, Churchill confronting Roosevelt with a lack of clothing. I want to know, did this really happen? What do we really know about this? But I'm sure there's many other stories there that we can dig into as well.
Well, yeah. So I mean, it's going to be super. So somebody know I read a Churchill quote to myself every morning as part of my morning ritual. So if I get to spend the whole week reading a book about Churchill, that's a good thing.
So we have to get our hands on that book. So because we don't have it yet. So
yes, Cheryl, come on.
Okay. We'll be on that. Hey guys, thank you for dealing with our awkward beginning today. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on X, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse historyhappyhour.com and tell us what to do. How many more History Happy Talk shows should we have? Let us know. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.